Hey, so this video is about trauma bonds, or they can also be called betrayal bonds. And what I think they are is basically a hijacking of normal human bonding mechanisms, which should be bonding based on like love and trust and like mutually beneficial relationship. So I think one of the main problems we have when we're in abusive relationships is we don't even know that trauma bonding exists. Like I didn't. So I assumed that because I felt bonded to this person, it must be love. We think that the only bond that exists is a love bond. So I think one of the first things to realize is that bond can also be formed with trauma. And there are several ways that I think the natural mechanism of bonding gets hijacked by abuse. So I forget where I heard this, but apparently humans will bond through a fear-based situation. So if two people experience a natural disaster, for example, and they survive, they will be bonded based on their fear during that situation. Like experiencing a scary event together will like bring people closer, and it gets hijacked when the reason you're feeling the fear is because this other person is abusing you. I think you can also bond because of that. So we have this natural mechanism to bond through fear, I think, as a way to like help us through the situation. But then it's obviously detrimental to be bonding with the person that's actually causing the fear in a situation. So that's one way that it happens. And another way is that children naturally bond with their parents. Like that's just what we do when we come into this world as babies. We want to love our parents, and we do love our parents. And even when our parents abuse us, we still love them. So the abusive parent is exploiting that natural love bond that the child has and warping it into a trauma bond, but the child doesn't necessarily realize that they are trauma bonded to the parent rather than love bonded, because they just tell themselves that they're love bonded, because that's kind of the default reaction of the child, to assume that parents equal love. Therefore, the bond I feel with my parent is a love bond. And this is kind of the beginning of our cognitive dissonance about the situation. And another point is about Stockholm Syndrome, and there are 4 criteria for that. So the first is a perceived threat to your life, which could be physical, but it can also be mental, emotional, or spiritual threat. Perceived acts of kindness, isolation from outside perspective, and a perceived inability to escape / learned helplessness. So obviously children fit the Stockholm Syndrome because they are dependent on the family. So there is a perceived inability to escape. And they only have the view of the family to like tell them what's normal. So the family is telling them that their family is normal and this is love. And they have no other perspective to compare that to. And then the acts of kindness cause the cognitive dissonance. But Stockholm Syndrome can also happen to adults as well, where you can be isolated from other perspectives by the abuser, like triangulating you with your friends, or like lying about you to other people, and then also lying to you about other people. So they're creating this whole situation where you're isolated in your perspective and you're relying on them to tell you what's real. So Stockholm Syndrome definitely causes trauma bond because of those criteria, where you just end up bonding with a person because you're helpless and terrified, and you're basically just trying to like cope with the situation. I think trauma bonding can sometimes be a coping mechanism because the brain just like doesn't know how to deal with the situation because it's just so traumatizing. And the final thing is that the abuse is addictive to the brain. So some people have said that it's like a gambling addiction where you don't know what mood the narcissist can be in. So you're like, oh, are they going to be nice to me today or mean to me? Like, it's kind of a gamble, and you get a high from it because you're always in this hyper-vigilant fight or flight mode, and the chemicals in the body like adrenaline that give you a certain like alert, hyper-vigilant feeling, and we actually get addicted to those chemicals because we're always in that state. So whenever we feel calm or safe, if that does happen, it feels abnormal because we've spent most of our time in this like abusive high, basically. And this addiction really explained why when people leave one abusive relationship, they will just run right into the arms of another abusive person, because to them the feeling of that high is normal, and the withdrawal from the abusive high is like crippling loneliness. Like, it is just the worst thing ever. And this is why we avoid the loneliness by keeping going back to either the same person or by going to a different person who's just gonna be like the same type of abuser. So it really is a double bind of the addiction of like, it feels bad to stay in the relationship, but then it also feels so bad to leave. So then you're confused as to like what the correct option is when both options feel bad. Because it's the same as like an alcoholic saying, I don't want to drink, but it's also really painful to stop drinking. And we know in the case of alcoholism, the solution is to get sober, and eventually it will stop hurting to be sober, but it may take a while to work through whatever emotions are causing all of that pain, which is, for people in narcissistically abusive relationship, the trauma is that we've just buried so many aspects of ourselves, and we've buried so many emotions that want to come up, and like that's all the pain of leaving the narcissist. Whereas if we stay with the narcissist, all of that stuff won't come up because we're just so focused on them. And so the solution is to get sober. Basically, you have to be single. If you're with a narcissistic partner, you have to get away from any narcissistic friends or family, and you also have to process all of these emotions. And you also can benefit greatly from knowing that trauma bonds exist, and trauma bonds will try to pull you back to this person when you've gone no contact. And this is just my opinion. I suspect that the trauma bonds are based on the emotions that they've manipulated you with, but there's also a component of like you gaslighting yourself about them loving you. Like, that also creates this perceived bond in your mind. So if you can be clear that they don't love you, they are a narcissist, it's all an illusion, you can kind of sever the bond on your end. Like, you don't need their permission to sever the bond. Because if you tell yourself like, this is over, I'm not going back, these are trauma bonds, they don't love me, I don't love them, or maybe you do love them, but it's not a healthy situation for you to be in, and then you can realize later on that love is actually something different than like what you had told yourself that it means. And the trauma bond will go away once you like face it and face all the wounds around them, and really get clear with yourself about like what has happened and the fact that these bonds are not love. So, love to hear your thoughts on trauma bonding, and thank you for watching.